7 o'clock?
And you were right. That-
Yes, okay, bye.
Yeah, there's a button, I was the same, you have to like, yeah, lift it and stand up at the same time.
I changed my other channel. They're all very. Just.
No, it didn't. Well, you're tall guy.
What's that?
6:04.
Oh, wow, yeah, that is tall.
I'm gonna call this meeting to order. The time is 7 p.m. on February 26th. I'd like to call the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting to order. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. The town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treated territories of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. And as the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and the waters of this territory. We're the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands, the Mississauga and Chippewas recognized through Treaty 13, as well as the William Treaties of 1923. A shared understanding of how the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. May I have approval of the agenda? Need a motion. Okay. Second by
Kristen.
Krista. Kristen. I
That's okay, that's
apologize.
fine.
I apologize. Any questions or comments regarding the agenda today? Seeing none? All those in favor? That carries. Any declarations of care and area interest? Seeing none. All right, well, we're going to go on to the minutes. We're going to be receiving the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting minutes of December 11th, 2023. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive those minutes? Ken? Pat, thank you very much. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Delegations, we don't have any delegations. We do have some matters of consideration. On 7.1 memorandum for the energy and climate change analyst, read the natural capital assets management plan introduction and presentation. Elaine Chang is here from the SLBC Advisory Services and will provide a brief presentation on tonight's report. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm just waiting for the slides to load. Thank you so much. I'm Elaine Chang from Conectado SLBC, and I'm presenting today an introduction to the, oh, did I just press that? Oh, did you? Oh, sorry. No, that's fine.
I want to check if it works.
What's that?
The button.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm presenting an introduction to the Natural Capital Asset Management Plan today. So this is just the beginning of the project, really just to let you know what our scope and objectives are and a little bit of background on how we're going to be executing the project. We will be coming back to you in May with the findings. So I'll start tonight with some team introductions and then an overview of the project, as well as an overview of a brief background of asset management. And then we'll talk about the project approach and work plan. And then there will be time for questions and discussion. Emily, if people have questions, are they allowed to ask throughout?
Sorry, through me, the
Oh,
chair.
sorry.
That's okay. We'll ask some questions and have comments at the end of your
At the end.
presentation.
Okay, thank you. So. Oh. Sorry, there was a graphic. Once. See the graphic on your screen?
It is blank for me.
It's blank.
That means that would be an animation or something. Is there an animation on it?
I clicked it, but there shouldn't be.
So I'll just try to reload it.
Okay.
Maybe 1 second.
Sorry about this.
No problem.
So just for your information, our team, Conectado SLBC, is a small firm that specializes in asset management for municipal infrastructure. Our team leads there. Oh, thank you so much. Our team leads, myself, Elaine Chang, we have Amin Singh and Donna Querengesser from Conectado SLBC. We each have 25 to 35 years of experience in infrastructure planning and asset management. And we have partnered with Green Analytics, and you see Amy Taylor up there. She also has an equivalent amount of experience specializing specifically on the natural asset side. So we really bring together, I think, a strong team of asset management and natural asset experience. We are also supported by our support staff from both firms. And most importantly, we're supported by the Town of Aurora staff who will be providing data as well as insights and knowledge on the different natural assets. So now I will give you a little bit of background on asset management. And we are hearing a lot lately about asset management because of the upcoming deadlines related to the Ontario Regulation 588-17, which requires municipalities to have asset management plans in place. And I think it's really important for us all to understand what is asset management. And I find the term to be a little bit narrow, to be honest, because asset management is defined by the Institute of Asset Management as the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from assets, balancing service levels, risk levels, and costs. So we're looking to really, the most important thing driving any decision-making is the ability to deliver services. It's not about assets and owning assets. It's really about being able to deliver your services while managing your risks and keeping your costs sustainable for the long term. So there has been a lot of work and a lot of leading practices and standards developed in the field of asset management. And it all really boils down to having a clear line of sight from corporate strategy down to tactical activities and day-to-day implementation and operations. So how do we execute on what council wants? And how do we monitor and make sure that at each step we're achieving what we want to achieve? And we have the appropriate data and consistent outcomes and outputs that we're looking for. That's the only way that an organization can control what it's trying to do. So that's really what asset management is about. It's about having that clear line of sight, formal documented roles, responsibilities, and processes, and the required data, technology, and people to support all of that. And so when we say we're implementing, when an organization says it's implementing asset management, that's what it's trying to do. That means it's taking, implementing initiatives to formalize and clarify every person's role in the organization toward achieving those strategic goals, and so that everybody understands what their role is, and also, of course, having the processes and technology in place that'll produce data that will help you understand and be able to make evidence-based decisions related to your assets. So the benefits of having all of that in place are, of course, having strong governance and accountability. By nature of having all of those roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities documented and formalized, you'll have effective and sustainable decision-making. So by making sure that you have, again, formal documented processes for your capital prioritization. How do you choose which capital projects to do this year versus next year? how does everyone in the organization view risk? Does everyone have the same risk tolerance? Are they making decisions that reflect a consistent risk appetite of the organization? Because if you don't have that documented and formalized, then really you're relying on everyone's individual judgment. And then that results in them taking on the responsibility, which isn't always fair to the staff. So again, it's about having effective and sustainable decision-making and enhanced customer service. As we mentioned, service delivery is the main driver of asset management. So really making sure that we understand what the customer, or in this case, the community wants, and documenting that. So expressing that in words so that everyone has the same understanding of what those services are and what is the level of service that we're trying to achieve with our assets. That is what we're trying to do. That is one of the benefits of having formal asset management in place. I mentioned risk before, so having a framework for everyone to understand and view probability and probabilities and consequences of risks in the same way will help you, will help the organization better understand or have more transparent decision-making. And then all of this, of course, leads to improved financial efficiency, just by nature of having better consistency and control of the day-to-day decisions that are being made throughout the organization. So those are the benefits. That's what we're looking for out of asset management. And one of the key artifacts in an asset management program is the asset management plan. And the asset management plan is a strategic document that describes how the organization is going to invest in its infrastructure assets and continually improve its infrastructure assets in order to support those required levels of service. Normally, the asset management plan looks out 10 years. That is actually the minimum requirement per the Ontario Regulation 58817. We have seen some organizations go longer than that, so 50 to 100 years. It all depends on the life cycle, the service life of your assets. So, but in any case, the 10-year, if you were to do 10 years or 30 years, it would be a strategic document that describes, as I said, what your investment strategy is in your assets. And it would start by explaining what are the service levels that we're trying to achieve with these assets. Then it would forecast out what are the life cycle improvements we need to make to these assets. So for example, if there will be growth, if we foresee growth in our population, do we need to add any assets? If there will be any changes in regulatory requirements or standards, construction standards, will we need to upgrade any of our assets? And of course, as assets deteriorate, which ones will need to be renewed or replaced and when? And then, of course, that all entails a financial need. So part of the asset management plan is to define the financial strategy, and that typically will show that the organization has less money than they would want. I've never seen it otherwise in any organization. So then the question becomes, well, what will the organization do to either increase revenues or reduce costs? So for example, defer costs. If we don't do some of the work that or the infrastructure improvements that we identified were needed, what types of risks does that entail to the organization? And how are we going to mitigate those risks? So that's what's really, that's the story that's being explained in the asset management plan. And it ties together the council priorities down to tactical planning. So the asset management plan, because it tells you over the next 10 years, what are the different activities that the organization needs to do for its assets. That will be the basis of your future annual budgeting. ideally, your administration, your town departments will be able to pick up the asset management plan each year and say, okay, these are the activities I'm gonna do in 2025, in 2026, so this is what my budget will be in each of those years. Of course, there will be changes, nothing's ever static like that, but at least it's a basis for understanding. You can say, I have seen in some organizations where the budget request basically refers back to the asset management plan. And then from there, from the tactical planning and budgeting, that then feeds into your day-to-day work delivery to define what are the infrastructure capital improvements that will be made and what are the operating and maintenance activities that will be done. So sometimes I get asked if the asset management plan is going to include condition assessments and flood forecasts and things like that. And normally, I just want to make it clear that the scope of an asset management plan usually does not include those types of activities. Creating the asset management plan is really focusing on bringing together the infrastructure needs that have been identified in other studies and in other places, as well as forecasting out the renewal needs from the inventory. So that's one of the sort of added pieces of information that the asset management plan effort brings, but it doesn't usually include. It would be too much to expect an asset management plan project to do all of the condition assessments and all of the growth planning and all those detailed studies are typically independent of that, and then they'll eventually feed in. So the asset management plan is really sort of a one-stop shop for understanding all of the needs in the organization and how they rank against each other, how the organization can prioritize all of these different needs. The Ontario Regulation 58817 had several deadlines. The first one was in July 2019 for an asset management strategic policy, and that has been that is now in place. That has been approved several years ago at the town. And then in 2022, there was a requirement for municipalities to have an asset management plan for core assets. And core assets were defined in the regulation as water, wastewater, and stormwater assets, roads, and bridges. So that asset management plan was completed by the town in time for that deadline. And now the town is working on the 2024 asset management plan, which will include, actually it includes an update of the core assets, as well as it will include all of the non-core assets. And so basically everything other than those assets that I just listed. And the natural capital asset management plan will also cover some of the scope of the required non-core assets. So both of those documents will be presented to council in June, in time for that to meet that deadline. And then in 2025, the asset management plans need to be updated to include a proposed level of service. So for this year, the asset management plan will explain what is the current level of service that's being delivered. And then if the municipality was to continue delivering that level of service for the next 10 years, how much would it cost? So that's what this asset management plan is trying to show. And next year, the town will be able to update that to say, okay, that's maybe not the right level of service. We're going to change our level of service and aim for something different. Maybe the level of service should be higher, or maybe it was too costly and we should lower the level of service. And that will become your proposed level of service. And this slide shows the asset scope for the natural asset asset management plan, and they are split into 3 different categories. So we have natural assets, which include wetlands, urban forests, water courses, water bodies, and open spaces. So these are really the naturalized spaces where there's very little disturbance to it. Then we have enhanced assets, which are assets that have been designed to mimic natural assets, but to serve a human service, human function. And those include urban trees, urban parks. So here we're talking about the open grassy areas, not the park amenities, which are included in the other asset management plan, as well as community gardens. And then the third category is engineered assets, and those are based on the term, it's assets that have been engineered to mimic natural processes. And these are pretty much the different stormwater assets, as you can see, and that those are also being covered in the 2024 asset management plan. But in this one, we'll be focusing on the natural functions, the natural processes and services that will be produced by these assets. So in terms of the approach of the work plan, this is a standard 5-question, 10-step approach to sorry. There were some animations in here, but I guess maybe my computer doesn't allow me to do the animations. But basically, this shows you how we will walk through the development of the asset management plan. So the first question is, what is the current state of my assets? And so what we're aiming to find out is we want to establish the inventory. What does the town own in terms of those 3 categories of natural assets that we just looked at? What condition are they in, and how will they deteriorate through time? So and that will give us the foundation for understanding the renewal need. Then the second question is, what is the required level of service? So for this, we will look at, we'll try to understand, or we'll look at documentation to find out what strategic priorities have been defined around these, and what the town has declared as any formalized levels of service, if there are any. And if not, then what we do is we will define level of service indicators and metrics, and then work with staff to understand what the current performance is. So for example, if we want to understand, if one of our metrics is what is the tree canopy related to town-owned trees, then we would, in the asset management plan, we would report the current performance for that metric. If there's not already a target defined, which I don't believe there's a specific target, at least not for town-owned trees, then the town would at least have that metric, have its 2023 score as a benchmark, and can then benchmark its performance going forward, so that, for example, the town can decide, okay, we want to make sure that we do better every year, or can decide, okay, we want to stay at least as good as 2023, and maybe not better every year because of funding considerations, but at least we want to stay at that level. So that's how we would use the levels of service. And then based on those scores and the scores and the potential targets that have been defined, we would try and understand, okay, we would work with staff to understand what is the risk of us, what's the likelihood that we may not meet those service targets in the future. In some cases, maybe you're not meeting the target already, in which case you know that absolutely you have to take some action, some life cycle action. You have to expand your asset base, upgrade it, or renew it. Or if there's simply a probability, like you're meeting your target right now, but you know that in the future, the town's population will grow and therefore you need more green space per capita or something like that, then what we want to do then is assess that the criticality and the probability, and then define what action the town wants to take to mitigate that risk. So that's where the life cycle activity comes in, like I said, growth or expansion, upgrade or renewal. And then that will then drive the funding strategy. And then we get to the end, which is documenting all that in your asset management plan, so that all of the constituents and the community can understand the decision-making process that was followed. So this is basically those different steps are defined here. So task 1 is the state of the infrastructure. We are in the process of analyzing the inventory right now, trying to understand the condition of the different assets. And then, and we're also working on the levels of service at the same time. Then we will, once we have an understanding of the service requirements and the potential gaps within service, then we will start talking to staff about risks and life cycle needs, which, as I said, then feeds right into the financial strategy. Task 5 is a continuous improvement task for asset management plans. All of the asset management plans are always written with a section on continuous improvement. How can the organization improve its data or its decision-making processes or its life cycle activities in the future to either better manage its assets or improve the reliability and the quality of the decision-making in the next round of asset management plans. The asset management plan needs to be updated every 5 years. And some organizations choose to do it more frequently, for example, to mirror the term of council. But in any case, it's not a document that is written once and then set aside. It's living and it will continue to be updated. So it's very important to continue to improve the town's practices. And then, as you can see up here, there will be another presentation to this group on May 13th, where we will have the findings, and then we will be presenting the Natural Capital Asset Management Plan to Council in June. So that was the introduction to the project.
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Elena, really appreciate it. Anybody want to put the motion on the floor so we can open this up for discussion? That we're going to receive this presentation and the comments from this is going to be referred to staff for further consideration and further actions appropriate. Have a mover and seconder. Dennis, seconder, Ted. All right, any questions or comments to Elaine on the presentation? Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair. Can we go back to the slide that looks up natural, like the 3 different types of infrastructure? Just wanted to- Also, through you, Madam Chair, just wanted to let you know that Nicole had her hand up.
Yes, I noticed. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I
Yeah,
think it was after this.
there was like 3.
Yeah,
It's slide 8.
this one.
That's it, yeah. So, just wanted to know if there's greater inherent risk with asset life cycle or on the engineered assets as compared to the natural and enhanced. So, for example, if you let your ditches or your culverts or your false wells they reach the end of their life cycle. Obviously, there's I guess my question is there a greater risk associated with engineered assets as opposed to natural or enhanced ones?
Yeah, it's so,
Sorry, and related to that, greater cost, this capital asset replacement?
Sorry.
Through the chair.
So the engineered assets, are definitely, it's more clear when they deteriorate. We also need to consider that there are different types of, consequences. So in our risk assessment, we'll look at, for example, financial implications of a failure. And then there's also environmental implications, there's health and safety risk, there's reputational risk. So we consider all of those, and it's a bit complicated to answer. We have to look at the different scenarios and understand, okay, if different types of these assets fail, like with stormwater assets, it could, we might be talking about potential for basement backups or flooding. So with that type of scenario, then that would entail a high consequence of failure. But there are also a natural and enhanced asset risks that would also be a high consequence of failure. So for example, if you had invasive species that were dangerous to health and safety, which we've seen that before, then those would be, again, a high consequence of failure. So it's hard to generalize, but we would be talking to staff to outline in enough detail and specificity that we can assess that risk, right? It has to be meaningful. We want to talk about specific, invasive species and things like that.
Ken?
And just as a follow-up, if I may.
Yep, through the chair.
Just wanted to know, if you were also examining the tie-in of differing cost to risk as well. So is there an inherent enhanced risk or increased risk as a result of deferring cost on the capital asset replacement or asset replacement?
Yes.
Ms. Chang?
Oh, thank you, through the chair. Yes, that is that's one of the required outputs of the asset management plan. I mean, required by the OREG. So the OREG states that if you for the financial strategy that you define or that council I guess endorses by endorsing the asset management plan, if that financial strategy includes deferring a lot of renewals, then what will be the risk mitigation? So yes.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ken. Nicole?
Great, thank you. So my question is actually if you actually answered the question that I had, but I do have a comment in regards to the presentation that's online with the agenda. It looks like it's a more dated version of the presentation. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to get the most up-to-date copy of the presentation.
Madam Clerk?
Yeah, we can just supply the updated version. We were just sent the other version on Friday, so there was no need to publish a new agenda. But I can definitely send it out to you for a copy.
Cool.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, Nicole? You're good.
That's good. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions? Dennis?
Go ahead.
Oh, no, she was on first.
Okay, through the chair. Thank you for the presentation. So when you were describing asset management plan, I followed it. It makes sense to me like a hockey arena level of service. And then we throw in the title natural assets management plan. And it throws me for a bit of a curve. And I think there was a slide there about the natural assets like wetlands, water courses, water bodies, open spaces. And I'm wondering, can you please provide an example for me of what level of service might mean for those natural assets?
Ms. Chang?
Thank you through the chair. That I almost want to turn that around to you because it's the community that defines these things. But defines what does the town want out of these natural assets? Why does the town want to own these and maintain these? So some of the benefits of owning natural assets or having natural assets there's carbon sequestration, there is some pollution control because as the ground filters water, it cleans the water, and trees clean the air, there's heat absorption. So there are many benefits. Do we want to get to that level? There are different ways to define levels of service. There's sort of high level outcomes, and then you can get more and more detailed and more quantitative. Now, the thing with quantitative level of service metrics are easy to measure, but they don't always capture what's important, right? And then whereas the community outcome level, that's what's actually important usually, right? But those tend to be very hard to measure. So there's always a trade-off, and that is one of, so we are working with staff. We will be workshopping with them actually tomorrow to help us define levels of service that are meaningful for the town. And of course, if you have any inputs at this time, we would love to hear them. But so, for example, one of the metrics that would be easy, but that would be easy to quantify would be for even to say the number of hectares of natural assets owned. So number of hectares of woodland or open spaces. So that could be one of them. Is that enough to get at what you're looking for? Because that automatically sort of entails, well, that will be doing some of those, providing some of those natural benefits we were talking about without having to get to the detail of how much carbon exactly are we capturing, how much, you know. So yeah, there's different ways of doing it. And yeah, that would be one of the simplest ones.
Yes?
Yeah, and I have a second question through the chair that kind of bounces off that, because I think when we see the report, I'll be very interested in how level of service is defined. Looking at the work plan, it seems that a lot of this discussion is going to be through workshopping with staff.
Yeah.
And I trust the expertise of the staff here at the town of Aurora. But I feel like how the level of service is defined will lead or set up the pathway, I guess, for the targets to be defined. So I was wondering if you could give me a bit more information about what other inputs, what other evidence, what other research might feed into those discussions of defining what those targets or benchmarking might be.
Right.
Sorry, yeah, and if I could just add to your query, is really around the stewardship of the natural capital assets, because I think it's a very broad bucket, and I don't know if that's an appropriate conversation to have, but I'm hearing that that's some of the input that you wanted tonight. So if you could help answer that question kind of in conjunction with Mr. Hand, that would be great.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So setting levels of service is a big, I'm going to say it's a big task. It's ongoing. So right now we're defining levels of service in the context of creating an asset management plan, but the organization, I think, with more time could conduct public consultations. Some organizations do these types of things to set levels of service. Not for everything, of course, but for some types of services where there is some opportunity to. I just mean, for example, I don't think you would do any consultation generally on bridge maintenance because right? People, you need specialist knowledge, to decide on when, what the condition of a bridge is and what the best type of bridge would be. But where we find, public consultation to be very useful is where in services where there's opportunity, there's opportunity to provide different levels of service. It's not all regulatory. And so, for example, recreation, parks, things like that. And again, the opposite would be something like water. There's not really any reason to consult on water. But and I think with natural assets, you have the same opportunity. And there isn't very much time in the scope of, creating an asset management plan to do that. But there definitely is opportunity going forward as part of the continuous improvement of asset management planning to spend some more time consulting with community and thinking about why do we own these and what do we want out of these. Of course, there's also research, like you're saying, research on what other communities have defined as levels of service and benchmarking with them. But really the most important thing is what does community itself want? And as I said, it's not a fast thing. It often, I find that levels of service are set through exercises that are similar to master planning. Because when you're master planning, in master plans, if you think of water, wastewater transportation master plans, there's always a hefty element of public consultation to find out what people want, right? And so a similar thing could be, I think it would be similar for a service like this to get that type of thing.
Dennis?
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. That was my last question. If for this section, I noticed that a lot of the workshops with staff, if there would be any public consultation, but it sounds like this part of it is going to be providing a good foundation for us to start off with the opportunity later on. That is correct. The chair, okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You explained things very well. I'm looking at benefits of asset management. It's my slide 9, effective and sustainable decision making. And the second bullet is consideration of viable options in brackets, including demand management. Could you give me an example of where we would do demand management?
Ms. Chang?
Oh, I'm sorry, through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So this is something that is, I guess that relates more to infrastructure, the hard infrastructure assets, possibly less so to the natural assets. But again, it kind of depends on what we want our assets to achieve, because if we're using for example, if we're looking to our trees to sequester a certain amount of carbon, then the other option would be to reduce our carbon elsewhere. So that would be a type of demand management. And then on the stormwater side, I think it's easier to imagine on the stormwater side that if we have other opportunities to divert waters, then for example through the natural creeks and so on, then we can manage the need for this, for example, storm pond capacity and so on, and especially by reducing the impervious surfaces. So things like that.
Councilor Gardner?
Through Madam Chair, the only time I've heard demand management is with respect to energy. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll defer.
Okay, Natasha? Just a quick through the chair.
Was this in the planning process right now, right? Or has it already been underway for a while? Ms. Chang?
Through the chair, it started, it's
There's there was existing ones, now it's kind of a buildup on it, or?
No, this is the first, I believe this is the town's first, natural capital asset management plan. There have been other asset management plans.
Okay.
But not focusing on natural capital.
And was there any discussion in regards to when the official plan was put together? This was just a recent redo of our official plan, which I would think
So I
relate
can-
to this,
I can
right?
answer that. So
Yeah.
this was a motion that I had brought forward a while ago.
Right, okay.
because we had some form of a natural plan, but
Okay.
it wasn't this
Exactly.
formalized. And also because we are changing OREG, 588 or whatever that number is.
Yeah.
And so through that motion, this kind of spawned that, and as a result, this is what, where we are today.
Okay. So then I'm assuming a lot of the information has already been kind of reviewed between the two?
Ms. Chang?
Between the two, sorry.
Well, with the
between the two
town staff and with the, with how many of the tree inventories and on such things like that.
Yes, through the chair. Yes, the data is, all the data are coming from town staff. I see you mentioned the official plan. I see the official plan as sort of being in a higher level, and it would guide what the AM plan should be aiming for.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so yes, we have to align,
Thank you. Natalie, did you want to chime in on any of that when it comes to the official plan and the sub-plans of the map of the asset plan, just for clarity for the group?
Sorry, which aspect of that?
The natural capital asset plan, I just wanted to understand where it kind of fell underneath the official plan and how that that was a sub-plan to the OP.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
explain how it's a little bit
Okay.
different.
Yeah, and also, I think, you're alluding to the reference to July 2019, there was like a
There was
reference
some-
to a previous.
exactly,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, okay. So yeah, so part of the same OREG that we're Ontario regulation that we're following under this project. It looks at all of municipal owned infrastructure. So the 2019 reference was from the kind of first generation of the asset management plan that looked at a specific group of assets. So you mentioned it was roads, water, wastewater. And bridges. So that was the kind of like the first generation of asset management planning here at the town. And so since then, they had a kind of second generation where they expanded that plan further to include other assets. And we're kind of on the third generation at this point. And we're now adding a whole new group of assets that had never been looked at in those previous generations. So we're looking at these natural capital assets that kind of historically municipalities didn't put an economic value to.
Okay.
And so then hence, weren't managed in the same way that, hard infrastructure tends to be. So now, they're trying to get all these excluded assets into one plan and follow the same strategy to, manage them, fund them, and included in that is, risk assessment, and other, maintenance strategies and things like that. So they will all be following the same, planning process. So this is the first time these assets have been looked at in that sense,
In a formal setting.
in a formal way,
In
yeah.
a form that.
That's kind of shocking.
Yeah,
We've had the economic
right.
evaluation, which was something that one of our staff members just took upon themselves. It wasn't typical
Yeah.
municipality, so we're a little ahead of our time, but it was really formalized, and I had this discussion with Natalie about how we formalize this, and this was the natural capital asset plan that we're working on today. So this is a big step forward, and I think a lot of municipalities are behind the ball when it comes to the natural capital assets. So I think this is showing a really good example within our region.
Yeah.
Any other questions for that? No, thank you. Okay, Ken first, of course.
And it's just, maybe this, through,
And then Sean, sorry, and then Sean afterwards. I'm sorry, I missed you. Go ahead, Ken.
This is likely out of the scope of the project or the exercise. But my question is, with regard to the surrounding municipalities, Newmarket and so forth, do we have a sense of, is there like, congruency, and at least in terms of the natural aspects, because anything that happens, like, in terms of carbon footprint, or let's say an invasive species that we're not looking after, hypothetically, the Emerald Ash or our neighboring municipalities, and it's going to have a direct effect, or vice versa. Right? Do we have a sense of the congruency, or what the other municipalities may be doing or not doing with regard to the same hauling?
Ms. Chang?
Thank you. I know that there are, for example, climate change strategies at the regional level. And so all of the municipalities are working toward those targets. I don't know which offhand, which of the neighboring municipalities have included the natural capital assets in their asset management plans yet. But I do know anecdotally that the forestry teams are very close knit. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sean?
Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Through the chair, just looking at the end deliverables when we get a sneak preview in May, is there any analysis based on the varying levels of services? Because we're talking a lot about the levels of services that through community consultations we're going to establish, or we may already have. Based on those levels, I'm assuming that that's going to change the funding strategy like downstream. So are we looking at, for example, like a ideal level of service, less ideal, and then working through that, the various funding strategies that would be available to us to meet the various scenarios?
Ms. Chang?
Thank you. The scope of this project and also the deadline for July 2024 for the OREG is to report on the current level of service and the cost of delivering that level of service for the next 10 years. The next deadline, which is going to be the July 2025 deadline, will actually require a proposed level of service. So I see it more in that scope. So that project hasn't started, but basically in your next update of the asset management plan, that's where you would look at different scenarios, different level of service scenarios and associated costs.
Sean?
Thank you. I guess I jumped the gun a little there.
Perfect, thank you. Pat, have another question?
No.
No, you didn't?
Oh, I
didn't. Oh, it's Councilor Gardner. Apologies, Councilor Gardner.
Through Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that green infrastructure and natural assets are a lot less costly than the other kinds of built infrastructure. So the more we can use them, the better it's going to be for our budget. And I'm waiting a long time. Thank you. Talking about green infrastructure because I think we're behind. Maybe not Aurora, but in the way of the world in many places, we haven't been giving enough attention to the green infrastructure.
Thanks, Councilor Gardner. Is there any questions there for?
No,
Or just a comment, okay. Any other questions? I just had one, just kind of going back to the stewardship, because I know that was a main component of my motion. Was obviously identifying our natural capital assets as a big first step and putting this plan together and understanding the funding strategy. But it's also the stewardship of these natural capital assets and understanding what is it that we need to do in order to maintain them. Are we gonna have any kind of opportunity to give feedback with some sort of report on what kinds of stewardships that we should be addressing with our current natural capital assets prior, like by the next time we meet, or is this the appropriate time to be talking about it now? Because I just don't see anything there, maybe because it's very preliminary at this point. But I thought perhaps maybe you could shed some light on to how we can actually move forward in a funding strategy with that information. Ms. Chang or Natalie?
Through you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Keel?
Yeah, because the timelines are really short, you could, if you had feedback today on the topic, you could, we would definitely take that in. And you would also have a chance, when we come back at the end of the project, with the final plan. I don't know if the full draft plan will come here first or go to council first. But you will have another chance for, you go to council. This will be discussed again with the final results, so that could be brought at that point. And I just wanted to note that part of the project is looking at best practices, and including a maintenance strategy for each type of asset. So that will be part of the plan as well. I don't know if you have any further comment on the maintenance strategy that will be put together?
Thank you. I was just gonna say the same thing, that we will, there is a section on, that's part of the life cycle, is to talk about not just capital life cycle, but also the operations and maintenance. In fact, for natural assets, it's mostly operations and maintenance. And so, there will be clarity shed on that. And yes, and we're open to your comments at the.
I appreciate that, and I'd like to term protection on some of that as well versus maintenance.
Right.
I like to think that we should be really identifying where our wetlands are and protecting them, the permeable surfaces. That is the #1 recommendation. I always say from Dr. Blair Feltmate that we should be protecting our wetlands as much as we can. And obviously everybody knows I'm very passionate about the Phragmites issue that we have, because if we don't get the Phragmites under control, then our wetlands don't really mean anything. So those are two things that are near and dear to my heart. Anyway, any other comments or questions?
Through you. Yep, Madam Chair. So just really being very practical here with my question, but thank you very much for sharing all the information, very insightful. What goes in behind the scenes making the decision when it comes to, like, as an example, how many garbage cans our town has throughout our town? Is that, like, I know it's not necessarily like a natural capital asset, but that's because I'm hearing, you know, we're talking about the maintenance, we're talking about obviously investing in the garbage cans themselves, and the reason I ask is literally from a practical experience of just a couple of years ago, the new park got put into the park down here in the ravine, right? And there's like no garbage cans at the playground. Going for a walk along a lot of streets in Aurora, I find that there's very few garbage cans. And I just was thinking this, like, man, I can't find a garbage can to put my garbage in. And I'm just curious, like, generally speaking, what goes into, like, why don't we have more garbage cans? Is it the cost of maintaining it? And then just with the presentation with the asset management, I thought kind of ties in. Obviously, it's practical and very small scale, but anyway, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay in my lane.
Okay.
And I could defer to Ms. Keel. I'm not so sure she could answer that 100% because it's a different department, but I would assume it's more service level. But Ms. Keel, perhaps maybe you could share anything that your knowledge from the department that could help answer some of the questions.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, and please jump in. I think, that would be a great example. Again, that would be an operations question specifically why there's so many garbages, but in that way, it's a level of service of, let's say, that walkway or that trail that you're walking on. What is the level of service the town wants to provide to the residents? You know, you have to balance out how many garbage cans you have available, because you wanna have a, beautified space, but you need to balance out the cost of putting the infrastructure for the garbage and the operational costs related to the pickup and disposal of it. So it is an example, I believe, of what we're talking about. It won't be exactly in this project, unfortunately. But that is exactly an example of a level of service that we would look at for these other assets that we have, not necessarily the walkway, because that is part of our main asset management plan. So where they would look at, trails and
Yep.
walkways and things like that. And they would, cover that topic.
So essentially, when we're presented at budget, the department heads will present to council their needs within that unit. Obviously, within the natural capital plan that we adopt, there'll be some top priorities that we truly need to identify within that time frame in our budget and our service level. That is what is presented to council, and that's when we will review that, whether or not that's something we can fit within our purview. And hence we have our tax levy and, the costs associated with that. So there is a little bit of research behind the scenes, but we leave it to our department heads to decide what those priorities are.
Makes sense, thank you. My only, if I may,
Yep, sure.
my only feedback as a mom walking my kids, I'm like waiting for a garbage can. So that's just my personal feedback, but
Fair enough.
thank you.
Any other comments or questions to the presentation? Okay, well, that's great. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call the vote on receiving this presentation today and accepting the comments from this committee and referring them to staff so they can act appropriately, and we'll hopefully get a nice report back in May to make some more comments. So I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Great. Thank you so much, Elaine. Appreciate that. Thank you. Perfect. All right, we have no informational items this evening. New business. We're gonna keep new business to at least no more than 5 minutes per person, just for the sake of time. Does anybody have any new business they would like to bring forward to this committee tonight? Kirsten, do you have anything you'd like to share?
I don't.
Dennis?
I'm good, thank you.
Right. Nicole? No. Shen?
I'm good as well, thank you.
Kent?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
Councilor Gardner?
Nothing for me.
Okay, all right. Wow, okay, well then, may I have a motion to adjourn? Need a mover and a seconder. Dennis? Kristen? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you so much, guys.